Welcome to Mindset Tools Mastery. I'm David Phelan. In this presentation, we're going to focus on how the mind deals with time to help you to use your mind most effectively to become all you're capable of becoming and to make your impact in the world. It would be helpful for us to be able to know who's joining us and where you are tuning in from. So if you would please drop those in the comment section, that would be really helpful. Also, if you have questions that come up during the presentation, you can drop those in the comment section as well, and I'll answer them either as we go along or at the end of the presentation. So when I address how the mind deals with time, what I'm referring to is the past, the present, and the future. And we're going to start with the future because it's the easiest to see, and then we'll apply these same principles to the past, and then we'll finish up with the present. And as we begin, just a warning, this presentation is for informational purposes only. It's not intended to be therapy, and if you find any of the exercises, the examples triggering for you, please discontinue watching and also reach out to us if you need help. So to illustrate how the mind deals with the future, I'd like you to think an event that you might have coming up. And I'm just going to give you a moment or two to think about that. So think about any event that you have coming up, and particularly one that may not go well. So think about an event that's coming up that may not go well. That could be like a conversation that you know you're going to have with somebody. It might be a meeting that you have planned. It might be the next project that you're going to work on. Anything that is coming up that may not go well. Okay. Now that you have that event in mind, I want you to close your eyes, and please don't do this if you're driving. But if you're not driving, close your eyes, and I want you to imagine that event going really, really bad, like it's just a disaster. And as you do that, notice how it feels. Okay, now open your eyes and get rid of that thought. Okay, close your eyes again, and this time I want you to imagine the same event, but I want you to imagine it going exceptionally well, better than you could have hoped for. And again, just notice how that feels. Now, sometimes when I work with clients, they have a hard time imagining future events like that, and if you did, that's okay. And if you want to get better at that, please feel free to reach out and let me know, and I'd be glad to help you with that. But if you were able to create those ideas in your mind, I want you to notice if you were able to detect a difference in the way that those two images felt. And now ask yourself this question: which one of them is real? Well, if you're like most of my clients, you recognize that that's sort of a trick question, because neither one of them is real. Neither one of them is happening, right? But the challenge is that our body doesn't know that. When you thought about the situation going poorly, your body responded as if the situation was happening right now and that it was going poorly. And when you imagine it going well, your body responded as if that were happening right now and it was going well. The body doesn't know the difference between what's real and what's vividly imagined. If you had the chance to check out any of the other presentations, I go into that principle in more detail. And again, if you want more help with that in particular, the body doesn't know the difference between what's real and what's vividly imagined, please feel free to reach out and I can connect you with some additional resources about that. So our body doesn't know when we think about the future that it's not happening. Our body responds as if it is happening. Okay? And so when I talk with my clients about that, the word that we use to describe that is an illusion. When we think about the future is an illusion in our mind. And it's what I call a compelling illusion. Now, what do I mean by that? If you've ever seen an illusionist like David Copperfield or Shin Lim or someone like that, particularly when they are really good, the experience that you have is, I know that's not real, but I can't see how it's done. If you've ever had the experience of watching an illusionist who isn't very good, it's like, I can see what you're doing. And that's not particularly entertaining, okay? So, but when the good ones do an illusion, there's a seeming of reality about it. And the future in our mind has that same seeming, that our body is responding as if it's real. So again, it's what I call an illusion, but it's a compelling illusion because our body is responding as if it is real. So we know that the future is not real. When we think about it in these terms, we know that our body doesn't know the difference between what's real and what's vividly imagined. And if we know these things, then we can use that to our advantage. So in other presentations, I've addressed tools such as creating positive anticipations. And that's the idea where we're able to think about things that are coming up, and we're able to imagine them going well. And because we imagine it going well, our body feels it as if it's going well right now. So we're able to elicit empowering emotional states in the present moment when we're thinking about something that has not yet happened. So creating positive anticipations is one way to use the idea that the future is an illusion, but it's a compelling illusion. Another tool that we can use is visualized rehearsal. And that's the process of imagining us going through the process to get the results that we want, imagining our performance. And because the body doesn't know the difference between what's real and what's vividly imagined, as we do that, it affects the body in the same way as actually doing the rehearsal. So visualized rehearsal is another tool based on these principles that can be really helpful. So again, if you'd like to learn more about those tools, then I invite you to check out those other presentations. But for right now, just keep in mind that the future is not real. Okay? So the future, we said we're going to talk about the past, the present, and the future, and we're saying the future isn't real. But what about the past? So this one is a little bit more tricky. When I ask my clients about the past, what they respond with is, well, the past actually happened. And although that's true, the question is, but where does it exist now? And what I would suggest to you is the only place that it exists now is only in your memory, only in your thinking, right? It may have been real then, but it's not real right now. But the challenge again is that our body doesn't know that. Our body is responding as if it's happening and if it's happening right now. And as I mentioned in one of the other presentations, this is why PTSD is so debilitating. When somebody experiences a flashback of something that occurred, then their body responds as if it's happening right now. That can include things like their heart starts pounding, they start breaking out into a sweat, their muscles become really tense because, again, the body's responding as if it really is happening. Okay, so when we think about the body not knowing the difference about what's vividly imagined, even though the past has actually happened, which is different than the future, it's also important for us to keep in mind that our memory is subject to a number of different kinds of distortions. So one of the distortions that can happen was illustrated in an experiment where the subjects were placed on different corners of an intersection. And they thought the task that they were engaging in was measuring traffic flow, and so they were counting cars, standing on the 4 different corners of an intersection. And then the experimenters staged a car accident in the middle of the intersection. And then afterwards, they asked the subjects to report what they had observed. And it's probably not surprising to you that they got different accounts of what happened based on what corner they were standing on. So often as I'm working with clients, we'll talk about our point of view or our perspective. And we know that even if the past actually happened, we were only observing it from a very narrow slice of what actually was happening. So that's one kind of distortion, but that doesn't occur to us that we're only looking at it from that narrow slice. It seems in our mind that what we observed is actually what was happening. Second kind of distortion was illustrated in another experiment, and I'm not sure exactly why car accidents are so popular for these kinds of experiments, but they are. So in this experiment, the subjects all observed a video of a car accident, and then they were all asked a series of questions. Now, unbeknownst to the subjects, they had been divided into two groups, and all of the questions for both groups were the same, with one exception. One group got the question, how fast were the cars going when they collided? The other group got the question, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into one another? Okay? In the third part of the experiment, they got another set of questions. And again, all of the questions were the same, including a question that asked all of them, was there any broken glass in the video? Well, the group that had got the question, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into one another, were more likely to report that there was broken glass, when in fact, there was no broken glass. So here we're talking about a situation where information is suggested after the fact that gets inserted into the memory. Third type of distortion, and this is from I used to teach Psych 101, and the chapter that we had on memory started with this story. And it was a woman, and I believe she was in her 20s at the time, and she was at a family gathering, and she was telling the story of her mom's death. Her mom died when she was very young. She drowned in the family swimming pool. And this young lady was describing in this at this family gathering, finding her mom floating in the swimming pool. And she had the complete description. Mom was face down. She was able to describe the dress. It was a white dress with red polka dots. She was able to describe the entire situation. When she finished the story, her aunt looked at her and said, "You weren't even there," right? So what happened in that situation? Well, that young lady had heard the story of her mother's death over and over and over again, but she lost the attribution. Where did that memory come from? Where did that image in her mind come from? Was it her own memory, or was it the image that she created when others told her the story? So it's important to recognize that yes, the past has happened, but what's in our mind is only a representation of the past. And again, as a representation, it's subject to a number of different kinds of distortions. So we talked about the future being an illusion. The past is also an illusion. But once again, it's a compelling illusion because our body's going to respond as if it was real, even if what's in our mind is distortions about the past. Okay? So we're saying the future is an illusion, the past is an illusion, the future and the past are not real. So if the future and the past are not real, what is real? Well, what's real is the present. And when we think about what's real, we think about the what's happening in the present moment, then there's a couple of things that we want to recognize. And one is that we want to recognize that sometimes the distressing emotional states that we get into are not about the present. Things like depression and anxiety are both about the past and the future, not about what's happening in the present moment. And one way to check that for yourself is to ask yourself this question. Is there anything that's happening right now that's difficult that you are not surviving? What's the difficult thing that's happening right now that you're not surviving? Well, as many difficult things as there may be in your life, right now you are surviving all of them. Does that make sense? And in fact, the more difficult it is, the more heroic it is that you're surviving it. So if you're feeling anxious about something that could happen in the future. Like if this situation doesn't change, if this situation continues to go poorly, this bad thing might happen. But right now, whatever the bad thing is, you're surviving, right? So depression oftentimes is related to things that have happened in the past, things that didn't go well in the past, and then my projection about what's going to happen in the future. But when I think about what's happening in this present moment, again, whatever the difficulty is, I'm surviving it. One of the stories that stands out in my mind about this is the experience that the first responders had when they were running into the burning buildings on 9/11. And afterwards, they were asked about that, and they were asked if they felt anxious about what was happening. And what they said was there was no time to be anxious. They were just in the moment. They were just, putting one foot in front of the other. And it wasn't until afterwards that they had the opportunity to think about the magnitude of what was going on. And so that's a really important principle, that in the present moment, we're not feeling depressed or anxious about the present moment, but about the past and the future. The other thing that is interesting to me about this is that for those of you who believe in God, Christians will talk about God as the God who was and is to come. But if you think about it, what name did God give himself? Well, the story about that is the story of Moses and the burning bush. And so if you know that story, then you know that Moses was out in the desert and he came up across this bush that looked like it was on fire, but it wasn't being consumed. And so God has this conversation with Moses in which he asks Moses to go to Egypt and to confront Pharaoh and tell Pharaoh to let God's people go. And so that was something that, made Moses a little nervous. And so basically he says to God, well, who should I tell Pharaoh is calling, right? And so God reveals his name. And what was the name that God gave Moses? The name was Yahweh, which gets translated I am, or I am who I am, right? I am is present. Not I was, not I will be, I am. And so what's interesting to me is that when we get out of the illusions of the future, when we get out of the illusions of the past, when we get into the present, we get into God. God is what is happening right now. So when we think about the present, and when we're saying that the present is what's real and it's our access point to God, then it can be helpful for us to know, how do we do that? How do we get out of the past and the future? So really the question that we're asking ourselves then is, how do we maintain present moments awareness? So first of all, just know that Western society makes present moment awareness really challenging, right? There are so many demands on our attention, like our mobile phones, social media, work life, our personal life. It's a lot. There's a lot of stuff going on. And each demand for our attention, we're liable to connect whatever is triggering us to things about the past or things about the future. My mobile phone pings and I see that I've got a text message. Immediately, my mind might go to the other conversations that I've had with this person, or thoughts about the future and things that I might say in the future. So my mind can lose that present moment awareness when something in my environment is demanding my attention. And this really reminds me of a saying of one of the Zen masters, and I might not get this quote exactly right, but he said something to the effect of, it would be one thing if we were trying to live simply in a simple world, but our challenge is that we're being asked to live simply in a complicated world. And that really gets to the heart of the challenge that we're dealing with. So present moment awareness is a simple activity in a complicated world. So there's some strategies that we can use that can help us to maintain our present moment awareness. And one of them is to notice what we're able to detect with our five senses. So what can we see, what can we hear, taste, touch, feel? And the reason this can be helpful in terms of bring our awareness into the present moment is that our five senses are detecting information in the present. Now, you can think about what I said at the beginning of the presentation. You have a memory of that, but that's not what you are hearing in this moment. Are you hearing the sound of my voice? Right? If you're hearing it in the present moment. Okay, now there's a couple different strategies for using your five senses. One of them is counting corners. And so I'll use this often when I'm working with a client in my office. I'll ask them how many corners there are in the room. And their most typical response is 4. So what they're identifying there is the corners of the room. And then I say, okay, but are there more corners in the room? So like the corners of my computer monitor, the corners of my desk, the corners of my file cabinet, and then not only the file cabinet itself, but each of the drawers and the handle of the file cabinet, right? So there are, 100 or more corners in the room. And so then I ask my client to start counting them out loud. 1, 2, 3, and they're looking around and they're noticing what they can see and they're counting the corners. And then when they do that, I ask them what they're thinking about. And oftentimes what they recognize is that that activity has changed their focus from whatever was going through their mind before to this activity of counting corners, and it keeps their mind in the present moment. So counting corners is one way to do that. When I'm driving, it can be things like looking for letters or numbers. Maybe you played that game as a child, right? So the letter A, can I find that on a license plate or on a street sign or something like that? B, so noticing letters and numbers, again, keeps my mind in the present moment, okay? Another strategy that's become more popular recently is counting them down. So that would be identifying 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can hear, 3 things that you can feel, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. And again, as you do that, it brings your mind into the present moment. So using our 5 senses, and that's another term that we use for that is grounding. When we use our 5 senses to bring us into the present moment, okay, is one way, one strategy. And based on that, another strategy would be tracking your breathing. So let's try that right now. So for a moment, I just want you to notice your breathing. Without trying to change it, just notice it. And as you're noticing your breathing, notice where you are in the breath cycle. Are you at the inhalation? Are you at the exhalation? See if you can notice that point that's right between the inhalation and the exhalation. And then again, see if you can notice that point that's right between the exhalation and the inhalation. Now, if you're tracking your breathing and you are noticing where you are in the breath cycle, then what you're paying attention to is this breath, not the last breath, not the next breath. So again, tracking your breathing is another way to bring your attention into the present moment. If you're in the middle of a conversation, you might have had the experience of the other person is talking, but your mind is somewhere else. I know that I certainly have had those experiences, and sometimes I have to apologize to my clients because it might be happening, right in the middle of a session. Okay, and so our mind can go someplace else when we're in the middle of a conversation. One way that you can bring your attention into the present moment in the middle of a conversation is just to take a deep breath before you respond. That simple act of slowing down and being intentional about your breathing not only brings your attention into the present moment, but gives you more time to think about what you're about to say. Another strategy for present moment awareness would be things like counting the number of times you chew your food. And so this is an exercise that has been suggested for people practicing mindfulness and has also been demonstrated to help with weight management. The more mindfully we eat, the more we are able to differentiate between what are good choices and what are unhealthy choices for us. And also just the act of slowing down while we're eating has been demonstrated, and chewing the food more thoroughly has been demonstrated to help with digestion. So chewing your food 40 times or 50 times, and you kind of have to play around with it to see what works the best for you, but being intentional. And so once when we were doing this activity on a retreat, what we asked the participants to do, they took a meal in silence, and we asked them to take a bite of food, and then after each bite to put their fork down, and then to count the number of times that they chewed their food before they swallowed, before picking up their fork and taking the next bite. Again, that's another way to bring your mind into the present moment. And then the last suggestion that I have is sometimes just saying, come back to the present, can be helpful. There have been times that I've been taking a shower and my mind is like someplace completely different. It's like, did I wash my hair? And so sometimes in those moments I just say to myself, come back to the present. Okay, so those are a number of different ways to practice being in the present moment. And now there's a couple of different challenges that will come up if you start trying to do this. One is that you may find that the present moment is boring. Especially when you compare it to what's on TV, which is designed to be stimulating, or what's on social media, and oftentimes it's good ideas or challenging ideas or controversy is what's playing out on social media. So if we're trying to avoid those things and just be aware of what's happening in the present moment, well, what's happening in the present moment might be, I'm breathing. Well, what's interesting about that? I've been breathing every moment of every day for my entire life. There's nothing particularly entertaining about that. And that's one of the challenges, is that we live in Western society which places a high premium on our being entertained. So as you try to focus on present moment awareness, it can be challenging to deal with the sort of boring aspect of it. Another challenge is that as you're working that, you might be thinking to yourself, well, I've got stuff that I need to do, right? When I work with people who are first learning mindfulness, first learning meditation, that's a common concern. I've got 20 things on my list of things to do today, and you're asking me just to sit here and notice, right? And so that can be a challenge for them. But if that's happening, what I would invite you to keep in mind is that what's happening in the present moment is what's real. What's happening in your mind about the things that you have to do is an illusion. It's a story that you're telling yourself. And so when we choose to focus on the future, or we get stuck in the past, then we are trading out the real for the illusion. And so sometimes to illustrate this point, I'll say to my clients, imagine that I was holding a counterfeit $100 bill and I was holding a real $100 bill. which of the two would you want? Well, and they usually said, I want the real one, right? But isn't that what we're doing when we trade the real, the present moment, for the illusion of the past or the future? So I know that it can be challenging, but I would really encourage you to consider practicing that. Now, there are a number of benefits that go along with it, and the benefits are that present moment awareness has been demonstrated to decrease anxiety and to decrease depression, and you can probably guess about that because we're getting out of the future and the past and in the present moment. Present moment is not about depression and anxiety, right? And so just getting out of the past and the present can help with that. But the other thing that happens is when we get out of the past and the future, it decreases our stress. And so all of the mental health benefits that go along with a decrease in stress show up when we practice present moment awareness, as well as all of the physical health benefits. So reducing stress has been associated with decreases in high blood pressure, decreases in gastrointestinal problems, heart disease, skin conditions, right? And so practicing present moment awareness can help with all of those things as well. So if you decide that this is something that you want to do, I would suggest to you that it's difficult to try to maintain your mind in the present moment throughout the day unless you have a specific practice to work on getting good at it. So one of the things that I would encourage you to do is to pick a time and an event. Again, it could be something like mealtime during which you're going to chew your food a certain number of times. It could be something like when you're showering, right? I'm going to really focus on everything that I'm doing while I'm showering, right? Or when you're driving, choosing the thing that you're going to focus on to keep in mind. And so if there are things that like this that you're doing every day, then you're going to have consistent practice periods. And then the other thing that I would suggest that you do is set up a reminder for yourself. One of the things that I did for myself when I was practicing present moment awareness and I was using a shower time to do that, I stole the sticker from my son, and it was a sticker that had those kind of googly eyes that kind of spun around, and so every time I would open or close the shower door, those eyes would spin, and that was my reminder. You could also set up a reminder like on your mobile phone or if you have another kind of alarm. So have a practice, have a specific time or event, and have a reminder if you want to practice it. If you do it during your practice time, it makes it much more likely that it's going to show up during the rest of your day. So, if this is something that's thinking about how the mind deals with time has been helpful to you, then I'd really like to hear from you. One other thing that I forgot to mention related to how the mind deals with the past. In one of the other presentations, we talked about pleasant memories and how to use pleasant memories to our advantage. When we know that it's an illusion and when we know that our body doesn't know the difference, then we can use those principles to our advantage with our pleasant memories to create empowering feelings in the present moment. And then, so that's a presentation that I've already done. And in an upcoming presentation, I'm also going to show how to neutralize distressing recollections. And so if those are of interest to you, please let us know. Now, again, if these things are helpful, it would be really beneficial for us to know that it's been helpful to you so that we can continue to produce these presentations and that we can share them with other people. And speaking about sharing them with other people, if you found it helpful, is there one or two other people that you can think of that would benefit from this presentation? Because if you can think of those people, it would be really helpful to us if you shared with them our Facebook page, Transcend Personal Development, and just let them know that these resources are here, that they're available, and that they're offered at no charge. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody might have. Okay, great. It really has been a pleasure sharing these principles and practices with you. And just as a reminder, if you're not currently working with me, but you would like to, please send me a message here on Facebook, or you can visit davidphelan.net and click on the client inquiries link and let us know what you're looking for. I'm David Phelan. Have a blessed day.